everybody, you join me for a real trip down memory lane in today's episode. I am driving a 1997 Fiat Coupe 20v Turbo. Way back when, my dad actually had 3 Fiat Coupes, 2 of them I think at the same time. I don't remember the specifics, but I know for sure one of them was a 16-valve turbo and the other was a 20-valve turbo, with the remaining one being either a 16 or 20-valve non-turbo. One of them was red, one of them was green, and I think the other was blue. There are 3 memories I have of that particular car. First off, it was very fast. The 16-valve turbo is the one that I have the most memories of, and that car was chipped. Back in the day, an alien concept. They'd done something magic to the car and made it go faster, and apparently it was indeed a very quick car back in its day. I also recall that the car had a remote control for its stereo, and for an 8-year-old, that was pure witchcraft. The last thing I remember is my father telling me that even back then, they didn't handle very well at all. He said, "James, you see, the problem with this car is that it's a very sexy new body on a fairly creaky old chassis." Didn't really appreciate what he meant by that at the time. I certainly didn't understand the word sexy at all, but that's what he said. However, it's taken over 20 years for me to actually finally get behind the wheel of one of these. It's fair to say that the coupe is currently experiencing something of a renaissance. For many years, even the finest examples of the breed were right down in the doldrums, with only a couple of £1,000 getting you a pretty darn good example, and a few £100 bagging you one of the more dog-eared ones that were out there. This car has been kindly lent to me for the afternoon by its owner, Graham. It's the second that he had, the first being owned back when they were fairly new. He had fond memories of the car, although not very fond memories of the dealer that he bought it from. In his words, the thing was a nightmare. He loved the car, but the dealer seemed to put more wrong than they made right. So, with no other choice available to him, he decided to learn how the car worked and got pretty familiar with it. So when he came to pick up another one almost 2 decades later, he knew that whatever needed doing, he could do himself, and he's done a lot on this car. Clutch, cam belt changes, things which aren't particularly easy with a 5-cylinder transversely mounted engine up front. The styling of these things is pretty distinctive. They're from the same school of thought as the Alfa Romeo GTV of the same period. I still cannot make my mind up whether I like this or not, so I need your help. Tell me, yay or nay in the comments, is this a cool looking car? From certain angles they look low and sleek and really purposeful, but then I see other things I don't like. The wheels look just far too small. This is riding on the original 16-inch items. It was on 17s, but apparently that made the ride absolutely unbearable. There's also some super cool design stuff I like. This interior, for example, feels really good even today. Okay, there's quite a few bits of cheap vinyl and plastic around here, and the switches feel like they're off an Alfa Romeo 4C, but this little strip of colour-coded interior is absolutely awesome. The dials feel like proper classic Ferrari items. They're really quite nice to look at even now, and the wheel itself is a pleasure to hold, even if it has some very odd textured stuff going on. I guess you'd almost call it a clamshell at the front, is quite magnificent when you open it up. And they offered these in some pretty nice colours too. My favourite being the Bugatti blue looking thing that they offered. A really bold hue, quite loved it. This car, as with many coupes it seems, is not entirely standard. Originally these put out about 220 horsepower, which is not that bad actually. That's the same as you'd get from a relatively modern Golf GTI. However, this one came with a hybrid turbo. It's got something of a custom exhaust on it, and it now puts out about 280 horsepower through the standard front-wheel drive with a viscous coupling limited slip differential. So what's it like? Guess I better find out. Old school is the phrase that comes to mind. The turbo is really quite asleep until about 3,500 RPM, then comes alive and the car pulls fairly hard all the way to its 7,000 RPM red line. It's no slouch despite a, for the time, relatively hefty curb weight of about 1,300 kilos. You need to keep it on the boil. The gear shift is an odd affair. It has a short shift modification to it, so slotting between ratios that are above or below one another, so first to second, third to fourth, that's easy. But going from sort of second to third is odd because there's a lot of travel side to side. Feels a little bit unnatural. The engine is quite responsive, so if you want to do a little bit of a rev match and flip it, that's easily done. And the soundtrack is pretty epic. Not overbearing, not silly loud. I feared that it might be actually. It's got just the right amount of 5-cylinder warble coming through. I still encounter a lot of people that think, probably thanks to Audi and a few other companies, that the 20 valves are 4-cylinder, 5-valve items. They're not. Although it's unlikely to win any awards, I don't think the handling's actually all that bad either. Now, when you're going in a straight line, that is what the car wants to carry on doing. You turn a little bit and it doesn't really want to go where you point it, but once it's set up, once it's weighted a little bit, you can actually work with it. In fact, in many ways, it's like some sort of old school rally cars. You have to know what you want from the car, you have to send instructions ahead, and then it will be somewhat cooperative. It doesn't feel like there's a delay in the steering. It's doing what I tell it to when I tell it, but the entire machine just takes a little while to get ready. Like an old Boxer, I guess. Takes a little longer to limber up than its younger rivals. That being said, at low speeds the car is, well, unpleasantly harsh, very firm and jittery ride. This one is on standard dampers that have been refreshed, so they're in probably as good a nick as any you'll find, and actually, it's quite well set up. Not the smoothest or plushest ride, but also not the harshest. One thing that does give this car's age away are the brakes. They aren't the most effective. You need a fair shove to get them to slow you down, but I like my cars that way. I would say I think that this car perhaps needs a little bit more setup work, because it feels like there's something of a flat spot in the power delivery, about 4,500 RPM, then the car picks up again and happily goes all the way out to 7. I'm also very impressed that this isn't really particularly creaky or rattly. It actually feels really solid. And the entire car actually is something of a credit to its owner. It's in really good condition. Now, he picked it up for a song, but he'll freely admit that he spent quite a lot of money on it, and I suspect if you are buying a coupe these days, they're going to come largely in two flavours. Vehicles which have been cherished, loved, and people are reasonably asking good money for, or they're going to be right dogs. You can't chuck it around a bend, you just can't, alright? I don't trust it to do that, let's put it that way. Yeah, it gets a little bit out of hand if you try and turn a little bit too sharply. If you want to make a mid-corner adjustment, you can unsettle it quite easily, but you can make perfectly reasonable progress in it. I was shocked because I expected the exhaust in this to be really rather raucous and unbecoming of what is now a proper classic, but actually it's really nice. Just the right amount of noise. I wish the Audi Quattro I was driving the other week sounded this good, because it simply didn't. The car is also a bit more practical than I thought it might be. The back seats are actually surprisingly generous. I wouldn't say that you'd get 4 6-footers in here, but if mum and dad are on the short side, or if you've got 3 kids, there's ample space. The boot is also surprisingly generous too. I expected that to be really miserly, but it's pretty good. Okay, yeah, so when you start to get brave, that is when the car starts to unravel, because you decide to start pushing into a bend and then it all sort of falls apart because you lean on the brakes to set the car up and then you feel it overloading itself very quickly. It's obviously a very front biased weight distribution in this car, so you try and get a bit fruity with it and it gets unhappy. You feel those little skinny front tyres giving up fairly fast, and then I can see how it could all go very wrong very fast. I know some people that have put some serious power through these things and they're brave, but actually as an item to enjoy, to pedal and to just have a little bit of fun on a beautiful road for a few £1,000s, I'm sure it's probably going to cost you a bit to maintain and to run, but I rather like the little coupe. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.